Good afternoon, everyone. This is Pastor Blake Anderson. I'm here with a very special guest today to share his story of faith. This is Mr. Abram Neumann, all the way from Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Got to come down and share his story with us at church last night, and we wanted to talk to him today and hear a little bit more about the ministry that's going on up there. Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you guys, I grew up in Montana. There's a lot of Indian reservations there. Most of us can't even begin to understand that way of life. It's not an area that is wealthy. It's not an area where there's a lot of opportunity. Drugs and alcohol are a big factor. It was one of the reasons why I started a homeless outreach in Montana, was just because of our Native American population. So many of them would end up on the streets, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. It's really a rough way to grow up. Mm-hmm. And so Abram actually lives on the reservation. So I'm going to let him share a little bit about what you do up there.
Yeah. So my name's Abram Neumann, and I run a ministry called Iglutecha. Iglutecha is a Lakota word that means make yourself new. And we run a homeless shelter on the reservation. In fact, we actually run 3 types of homeless shelter. One that's for people who are actively intoxicated, one that is for people who are sober and willing to work with a caseworker to change their lives, and then we run a day shelter that's open for people from those 2 shelters and for just community members who might need a place to shower or just be safe and warm.
Well, I think that's really important. Most people that don't understand a transient population don't understand that they can't go to a lot of shelters, mm-hmm. because a lot of those people are under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. A lot of shelters won't let them in if they're intoxicated in any way. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they don't need help, but they have nowhere to go. So I think it's so cool that you guys actually have a place for people that are actually still using to see an opportunity to get clean.
It's one of the hardest types of shelters to run. It is, something that I can see it takes a toll on the staff. It takes a toll on me sometimes, but it's very needed, especially in South Dakota. Last night hit -8 degrees, and so without our shelter, without them having a place to go, people freeze in that kind of weather.
Yep. Well, it was funny. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was doing our homeless outreach ministry, we didn't care if you were using or not. We'd come to a public park, we'd serve food, we'd bring the Word of God, we'd give them sleeping bags, tents, whatever they needed, we were going to meet their need. That included free medical care as well. We had a nurse with us that she would provide free medical care. And it was funny because somebody asked, well, why would you serve these people if they're drinking? And I said, well, they're still God's children and they still need love. They still need that. And I had a great story where we served this guy food, and he sits down and he breaks out this great big tall boy of Steel Reserve, cracks it open. He's like, I love you guys and I'm hungry, but I'm not going to quit drinking yet. And we're like, that's okay. We still love you. Mm-hmm. But it's great to see that somebody's actually caring about those people that, even though they're in an active addiction.
Yeah, you gotta love people right where they're at. I was talking to a pastor who was in recovery himself, who said that he couldn't escape his addiction until he knew that he was loved, and until that guilt and shame that he had was removed. And so unless you can reach out to people right where they're at, so many of them are going to remain stuck right where they're at. And so we love them where they're at, but our goal is to make sure that there's a way to get out of that, and that they're constantly being encouraged to get sober and to rebuild their lives.
Yeah, it's an interesting ministry. Mm-hmm. And you work out of a church there. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about that ministry.
So I have been serving at a church called Pine Ridge Presbyterian Church, and it is a church that's located right in the middle of the town of Pine Ridge. And what initially attracted me to that church was hearing that it's where all the homeless were going. And so when I went and checked it out, sure enough, the vast majority of people at that church, like 90 to 95% of the people, were people who I knew to be homeless or to be living on the streets. And it was just exciting when I saw it. I was like, this is God's kind of church. These are the types of people who Jesus hung out with when he was on this earth. It wasn't a whole bunch of people who had their lives together, but it just felt immediately like where I belonged. And so I got involved on the leadership team there, and got involved. Then from there, there was some church drama over whether the homeless really belonged in the church. There were some people who felt like if we have all these homeless people here, they're going to chase away the more successful people. And so, and the type of people who can keep a church going. And there was some merit to that. It was, hard to run a church the way we were running it. And I always joke that we were lucky if we passed the offering plate and the same amount of money came back. But at the same time, when these leaders started, actively ostracizing the homeless community and discouraging them from being involved, refusing them membership, and then even getting to the point of refusing them baptism, I stood up against that. I took it to the presbytery, and after, they tried to correct these leaders, eventually they removed these leaders. So when the dust settled, I was the only person left from the leadership team of that church, and so I just asked if I can keep on running recovery meetings, if I can keep on having church services, and I've been doing that for about 2 years now, and I've taken the classes to become a commissioned lay pastor, and so I'll be getting commissioned in February.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the problems with the modern local church, right? Mm-hmm. We've forgotten Matthew 25:40. Mm-hmm. We've forgotten that the church exists to serve the least of these. Mm-hmm. That those people in need, that's who God's trying to reach. Mm-hmm. But can we ever do that if we're a church that's built ourselves up with self-righteousness, mm-hmm. saying, well, you don't belong here? It becomes a very hard thing. To me, it reminds me of the Pharisees in Jesus' time, mm-hmm. where they had been practicing as Jewish people for so long. They loved the law, and they knew the law, and they thought, well, we're really living according to it. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not, you don't belong with us. Mm-hmm. And so anything that pushes back against what we do, we can't have it. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those things, I think it's actually led to a de-churching of people in America. Mm-hmm. That people don't feel welcome coming to the modern church because our churches, in my opinion, as a pastor, should look more like hospitals than mm-hmm. what we currently have. We're supposed to be finding the lost. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be helping those people that Jesus is really looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think too often it's the self-righteousness inside of us that pushes those people away. And I would love one Sunday to just have a church full of homeless people. Mm-hmm. Because I think what happens is those of us that know Christ, how did most of us come to know Christ? Well, a lot were from a time when they really needed God's grace. Mm-hmm. I think that we see God more at work when we work with those people that are in such desperate need of God's grace and mercy. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say it, but they're almost easier to reach than people who don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's a lot easier to bring someone to God when they know that they really need God, right? When people are comfortable and, content with where they're at, it's a lot harder. Jesus said when the Pharisees were complaining about him eating with the tax collectors and the sinners that it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the ones who are sick. And he wasn't saying, "Oh, the Pharisees are healthy," right? No. They had their own sickness, but he was saying these ones know that they need a savior, whereas you guys are content where you're at. And so,
I think it's one of those problems we're going to continue to face in the modern church until we really embrace Matthew 25:40. Mm-hmm. What you do for the least of these, you do for Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I know that different churches feel differently about that. Mm-hmm. Some churches, it's really easy to say, we want to serve the lost, we want to serve the broken, mm-hmm. and we'll do that financially, but we don't ever want to see it. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it's ugly. Mm-hmm. There's some ugliness that comes with that. It's not always the prettiest thing in the world when you're actually serving people that are lost and broken. Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine some of the things you've seen on Pine Ridge Reservation. I'm sure, homicides aren't out of the question. All of that stuff is on the board for what's going on there. Mm-hmm. But when you truly go out and serve the least of these, you do see Jesus at work. Mm-hmm. You want to see it better than anything you'll ever read about. Mm-hmm. Go search for the lost. Yep. And here's the thing, when we actually go search for them, Jesus will help us find them every time. Mm-hmm. And it's a cool thing when it's done right, but like I said, I think that there's so much of that self-righteousness that's built into us as Christians. Like, hey, we're walking with Christ. We're good now. Mm-hmm. We don't want to see it. Yeah. It's one of the things even here at Martin Luther, we change the way we do missionary projects here. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's geared towards being missionaries in our community here. Mm-hmm. So we started a ministry. It's actually based on Matthew 25:40. Mm-hmm. We find people in our community that are in need. We serve them food. We go to their homes and bring them food. And we always see the food as just a means. Mm-hmm. It's a means of the gospel. Jesus went out and dined with people. We have to be willing to do the same. Mm-hmm. It's not just about sending them money. If I dumped $1 million on Pine Ridge tomorrow, would it fix any of the issues?
It wouldn't fix them. It would help. But yeah.
But would it fix them or would it prolong them?
Yeah. I'm always going to say that having resources to help people is always going to be a big thing. But at the same time, yeah, in the end of the day, it's people helping other people change their lives. You need boots on the ground. You need people being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough. I served with your dad. I was underneath him when he was the senior pastor at my last church. And I got to hear all these stories about Curly Sue on the Indian reservation. Mm-hmm. His son that they refer to as Curly Sue now. Mm-hmm. Out on the Lakota reservation serving these people and I always thought that was just so cool. That when we talk about missionaries, I think people always assume that means going overseas somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I did. Pine Ridge was not my first choice or my idea of where I would be when I felt that calling into missions. It was where I kind of ended up, not by choice, and then God used that experience to actually call me to Pine Ridge.
Yeah, so I think that we just misunderstand the term missionary. Mm-hmm. We think it means we have to go overseas and we have to go to places like that to spread the gospel. Mm-hmm. But look at the mission field God's given you where you're at. Mm-hmm. How many people had not heard about Jesus before you got there?
Yeah. I would say quite a few people haven't been introduced to Jesus. One of the things that I did find, though, is that a lot of people had heard the message, right? Actually, one of my very first experiences with ministry in the town of White Clay was that the group that I was with gave a gospel presentation before a meal. And so one of the guys got up, he told the gospel story, and then he sat down. And then one of the guys from the street got up and added some details that he felt like one of the team members left out, right? And so to me, that showed that, in this case, like, people have heard the message, but have they seen it lived? Have they experienced the love of Jesus? Have they, experienced the Holy Spirit in other people? And so that's kind of where I see my job is not necessarily going out and preaching that message, but showing people the love of Jesus, showing people what it is to be a disciple, and calling other people into that.
Well, I think that's very much how Jesus did it, right? He didn't just go preach and be like, I'm going to head back to my tent now, I'll see you guys later. He would preach, but he would walk among the people. Mm-hmm. He was with the people. Even when he would send his disciples out, he'd call them back to him and say, well, how'd it go? How can I strengthen you? Mm-hmm. Let's go do it again. Yep. And so discipling, when we look at that, even in a place where you're at, it's about modeling that life with Christ so that others can do the same for somebody else. And how's that going in Pine Ridge?
It's hard. It's one of those things where I think in the past there's been a lot of very fear-based and works-based gospel. There's also been a lot of kind of cheap grace, kind of the idea of like just pray the prayer and, pray every once in a while and God's got you. And so discipleship hasn't always been taught or modeled in a good way. And I'm not saying this is just Pine Ridge. There's been kind of that broad problem too of faith in Jesus and discipleship being taught as a whole list of don'ts, a whole list of, just don't do these things and you're good. Whereas that's not what Jesus taught. Jesus taught a proactive faith. He taught a whole new way of living that includes a whole lot of do's. And so there's people who are getting it and there's people who are living it, but there's still a lot of room for growth, and there's still a lot of people who, just got to be patient with, as, a lot of them are still in their addictions or early on in their recovery.
And that's hard because I've worked with addiction treatment, and it's hard because as many wins as you might have, you're going to have 10 losses.
Yep.
It's still something that God is the only cure for addiction, period. The only way you're going to ever be free of it is to come to Jesus. So I do celebrate recovery as well. And I love their slogan of, we have a 13th step where you're set free. Mm-hmm. Whereas AA, they've got the 12 steps and people get addicted to the 12 steps. Mm-hmm. But Jesus can actually set you free from that. Mm-hmm. It's... So on the reservation, I know you guys don't have a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. Is that your biggest challenge?
Oh man, there's so many challenges. But
he's like, let me give you the list of things we got going right. It's shorter.
So some of the big challenges is really, it is resources and facilities. We actually run our homeless shelter in tents, which is not a great way to do things in the long run. They're great tents. I'm super grateful for them, but it's a lot easier when you have running water and toilets that flush and, can be in just one facility. We have to have our tents, and then we have the day shelter, and that causes a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges with just being able to keep staff and be able to, I think, finding good staff and then being able to keep good staff has always been a struggle. And then just the nature of helping people in a place where there's so much addiction and so little opportunities and resources for people. It's one of those things where the addiction rates are so high, it can be harder to find healthy people. It's one of those things where there's people who just don't have any family members who can take them in who are doing well. They don't have much of any support network. We were doing assessments with clients who were coming into the transitional shelter, and we kept on asking them, like, what sort of resources do you have? What kind of people are in your life who support you? And for way too many of them, it was like, oh, just you guys. Like, okay, that's hard.
Yeah, the difficult challenge is really it's about teaching people a new way of living and giving them a new family. So it's almost where you got to build enough of those successes that are just those guys that are going to push through no matter what, to where you can have a support system to bring people in and have greater success. It's a challenge to get that started. When I'm going to guess when you got there probably weren't a lot of people doing real well.
Within the homeless community, definitely not.
No.
It's a big community, so of course there's always the people who are successful and doing well. But yeah, within my like homeless community, within the church community, there weren't a lot of people doing well. And now we're seeing some good successes. Although a lot of times success means that the person moves on to better circumstances too. So a lot of times success means that, hey, they got a job, they're moving up to Rapid City, or just going elsewhere. And so sometimes that's kind of one of the sad things about helping people get better is they go to other places. But there are some who've stuck around, who are doing well, and I really hope that the church can more and more be that. One of the sermon topics that I'm kind of stuck on, that I feel like I maybe overdo sometimes, is just this idea that God's made us family. When there might not be so many healthy family connections, where bridges may have been burned, where people maybe never had a healthy family to begin with, that we are family to each other. If God's adopted us, then we're brothers. Yep. And beyond just being brothers in like the maybe common sense that's used in the church, oh yeah, that's my brother. It's something that really comes with responsibilities. It comes with a deep commitment that we have to have for each other.
I would say it's probably closer. My background before I was in ministry, I was in the military, and I would say it's probably closer to that kind of brotherhood. That it's, even when we don't disagree, or we disagree, we may just absolutely dislike each other, but we're willing to die for each other tomorrow. That's the kind of brotherhood that you have to build in that community. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. Yeah, it needs to be that type of closeness and commitment to each other, and that kind of brotherhood and sisterhood where we are able to look past each other's mistakes and faults and flaws, and just be committed to each other even when we don't like each other necessarily. Just that kind of familial love. And sometimes with family love, you're loving your family in your actions, when sometimes in your heart you're not quite feeling it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they hurt you, sometimes you're having a hard time, sometimes you're super annoyed, but you love them, right? And I've actually seen that in some other recovery communities where they, made that commitment of, we don't have a whole lot of healthy family anymore, so we are each other's family. And they started watching each other's kids and giving each other rides to work and calling each other at 3 a.m. to check in, but that kind of love is what I want to see happen in Pine Ridge.
So let me ask you a question. Would it be a thing where other churches could plug in with you and do mission trips out to Pine Ridge? Would that be a way to support your guys' ministry out there?
Yeah, definitely. There's all sorts of things that need to be done. We're not going to run out of needs for help. So one of the ways that we could use help is like just simple construction and repair type of work. We could also use help feeding meals and preparing meals. Um, I have a big need for people who might want to come out for a little bit of longer terms than your traditional mission trips too, who might be willing to get to know people and get to know how things are enough to help with operations of the shelter, or help run studies and kind of help with the community life too. I got an open room in my house, so always looking for that kind of help too. One of the things with church groups coming out is we really want to make it be something where there's giving and receiving involved in it too, where sometimes in the past I've worked with groups that kind of had an attitude of like, oh yeah, we're out to fix all the problems and to save all these people, and that's just not a healthy way of coming in. And so instead it's, we try and create some opportunities to learn and to gain something from the community, to learn the history, to learn the culture, to be built up spiritually, as well as them serving and giving.
Well, I like to tell people that all the time, that if you're out to save everybody you've ever met, that's Son of God work. And last I checked, I wasn't him. You're not him. That's Son of God work. We'll let him do that, but we can be his hands and feet, and we can do as he called us to do, and just serve the least of these and love his people. Mm-hmm. That's really what it comes down to, is how do you actually love people? Mm-hmm. So have you had any experiences out there where you've just seen God's love in action?
Yes, many times. I think, I don't know, some of my favorite people who that are really close to my heart, I haven't gotten to see them a whole lot lately, because they moved on and they got involved with another ministry, but they started up in the shelter, started up being homeless and not being in a great place, being really bad off in their addictions, and being people who just did a lot of damage in the community. Try not to go into too much details and tell all their business, but they got sober at the shelter. They got to that spot where they wanted to help others. They wanted to be in ministry. They're a couple, and so they actually stayed with me for a while in my house, and they're good support. Things didn't wind up working out with the housing situation long term, but I don't know. They've just been ones who I've seen go from, being people who needed that love and support, and then just getting to watch them as they grow and they're loving other people. I see them in the community, helping out. They're staying with a ministry that lives like 4 miles south of me. And that's just one place where I just see like God's love in them as they're starting to love other people. They had a baby just recently. They were sober for the entire pregnancy, and the wife got her GED just recently, and just like seeing them have that transformation in their life, and now loving other people where they're at and helping other people change has just been one of my favorite things. That's one story. That's what I'll give you for now.
Yeah, and there's one thing people don't understand about the reservation life is there's already a distrust there. Mm-hmm. There's a distrust between the Native American population and our government. Mm-hmm. There's a distrust between them and the church. Mm-hmm. So you have to overcome that. Mm-hmm. Plus teach them a relationship about God. How's that going as far as...
Yeah, so building trust is really hard. There are people who, hear that you're a church guy and kind of immediately don't like you for that reason. There's people who, just on the level of race, they've seen enough damage done by white people, and so they meet a white person and assume that they're going to follow the same, stereotypes. And so,
White savior, right?
yeah. I was actually called that just 2 weeks ago. It's one of those things that's really hard to break out of. I think the important things are having an attitude of, humility, that you don't have all the answers. I think being consistent is really important, that, people are going to remember the one time you mess up, right? The one time that who you say you are, who you're trying to be, is not who you are in that moment. And so just trying to be consistent and show Jesus in everything. And then also one of the things that I think helps build trust is being part of the community and really living that life. It's something where I think I haven't always had a whole lot of resources personally, and I think that's actually been a really good thing. It was a good thing when I drove the really beat up Mazda 3 with 3 different colors of metal on it and a zip tied on bumper, because
You just fit in with the crowd.
I had some classmates. I went to school at the Oglala Lakota College, got my bachelor's in social work, and every winter they have this res car parade, and they're all telling me, like, if you just enter your car as it is, you don't have to put on the bullet hole stickers or tape on the window. Just drive your car into the parade as it is. You'll win, Abram. So my car was over the top. I didn't even tell you about the dents in the door, the hail damage, the cracked window, the red tape over the back tail light, any of that sort of stuff. The big dented in hood. It was a rough thing, but I think not always having means, and this actually includes even being homeless for a time, living in a house that had no running water or electricity in the middle of the winter, going through some of those rougher experiences built that credibility a little bit, and built that ability that, I can help people who are going through those same sorts of things.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about the res car.
Uh-huh.
People don't understand what that is, but on the reservation, you will see some vehicles that should not be on the road. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that they have a parade for them makes me really happy.
It's fun. They have it up in Rapid City, I think during the Black Hills powwow, if I remember right. But yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, but I think those experiences that we have, I think that's really what Jesus is talking about when he says walk a mile in somebody else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
That it's really hard to reach people if you've never lived that life.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never experienced hardship, mm-hmm. well, how are you going to connect with these people that are experiencing it every day? Mm-hmm. It's a real thing for them every day, and you're telling them, hey, look, things are going to get better, but you don't know about it. Mm-hmm. How are you ever going to build that trust? I don't think it happens. So it's almost, I actually preached about this, I think it was last weekend, that it's a sign of spiritual maturity when we can go through times of hardship and still praise God in that. Mm-hmm. Because we don't know what he's going to use it for, but we know he's going to use it. Mm-hmm. He's not just doing it for no reason. Mm-hmm. But instead of looking at how God is punishing us in those situations, but to look at how we can praise him. Mm-hmm. Because if you wouldn't have had those experiences, do you think you'd be where you are now?
I don't think so. I've learned to weather those storms and circumstances much better now, because I have, through each one of those things, I've seen how God has used it, right? And so God does these things where he puts you through the hard times to grow you, to mature you, and to put you in a spot where you can better help other people. And so, I can look back at how he's taught me that I don't need money or things. I don't need comfort. I don't need to uh, be liked. I don't need to have people's praise. I have just had like layers of things at different times, stripped away. And it's one of those things that has just built me up in my faith and my ability to just take everything in stride and be in more of that spot where the only thing that I need is Jesus and to be walking with him.
And that's a beautiful thing. That's where we're all trying to get to. It's just that we don't need these things. They're nice, cool. But what if you didn't have it tomorrow? Because in your situation, you very well could have no running water tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, especially with this cold, we've had that crazy cold snap. But yeah, I've been very blessed lately. Now I've lived 10 different places since I moved to the reservation.
And what year did you
10
move
years
there?
ago.
10 years ago?
Yeah, I moved there in 2015. So May 25th of this year is going to be the 10-year anniversary. But I've lived 10 different places, and now I'm finally in a home where I'm hoping to stay for a while and finally have those blessings. But again, it's something where I'm really grateful for the times that I had when my home was the Mazda 3 or the Ford Taurus station wagon, or where I was in a trailer that didn't have heat or running water. All those things have wound up being used for good, and so yeah. But now it's been a little bit more not necessarily comfortable, just physically comfortable, as now, of course, God's creating those challenges in different places.
Yeah, so you told an interesting story last night about the liquor problem in, was it White Clay?
Yep.
So tell these guys a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in church last night we were talking about just how God doesn't always call us to be focused on here's the results, on here's how we're going to change everything. Sometimes he just calls us to simple acts of obedience, simple acts of love. And so in the story, I wanted to share about how God took that and he did create those big changes. And it started in this little town of White Clay. White Clay was a town that had 4 liquor stores. They sold 11 to 13,000 cans of beer per day. They're just outside of a dry reservation. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is the size of Connecticut and its landmass. It has 47,000 tribal members, but it's a dry reservation. And so right there on the border, 2 miles away from the capital city of Pine Ridge, and literally right on the borderline, there's this little town of White Clay that had these 4 liquor stores. And the situation with so many people coming to buy alcohol meant that a lot of people just came and lived on the streets. It was a place where there was virtually no law enforcement. There was very little help or any types of resources. The town actually had an official population of 15, right, with the 4 liquor stores. And so there weren't even public restrooms. There was very limited medical care. A lot of times you'd call an ambulance and it just straight up wouldn't come. Or it would come, an hour later, after the person's done having their seizures, or whatever was going on. So it was a very rough town, and it was just where people went when they were just deep in despair, whenever they're dealing with really heavy traumas. It was a really, really rough place. And so I just had a very simple ministry. This was when I first started in 2015, of just walking on the streets, talking to people, praying with people, and seeing how I could help them or encourage them. And the major transformation happened where I guess first how I kind of got lined up for it was I was working on a lawsuit against the sheriff's department. They weren't giving equal protection to people in White Clay as they were to the other towns in that county. And, based on their actions, it just seemed like they did not care about the lives of the people who were there on the street. And so I was working to put together a lawsuit against the sheriff's department based on the Civil Rights Act, based on equal protection. And each day after I got off of the street, I would document everything that I saw, all of the different crimes that I saw happening, just as evidence of that lack of law enforcement. Then the county commissioner for the county where White Clay was in, Sheridan County, said some things that he really shouldn't have said in front of the Liquor Control Commission. He was asked if there was adequate law enforcement to keep things safe in White Clay. He at the time was pursuing a grant to get more funding for their sheriff's department. So he said to the liquor commissioners, absolutely not. And that was enough where they felt like they could challenge these liquor licenses again. And so they brought the issue to the county. Of course, the county said, oh yeah, well, no, we think it's a great location for those liquor stores. Everyone's kind of related in that county, and they also had this idea that if these liquor stores are gone, people are going to drive further, and it's going to be a bloodbath on the highways, and our town is going to become like White Clay. And so some citizen protestants, myself included, and some other people who were residents of that county filed our protests. It triggered a hearing in front of the Liquor Control Commission that was run just like a regular court hearing. It was an evidentiary hearing where we brought evidence of that lack of law enforcement and of the destruction that White Clay was doing to the community. And at the time I had like 36 pages of here's everything that I saw in White Clay. God brought together just this awesome team of people who all testified. Even our lawyer came in pro bono. He's one of these ones who sued Monsanto for millions and millions of dollars, but he just volunteered to represent us. And the Liquor Commission voted unanimously to not renew the liquor licenses for those beer stores. There was some more legal drama. It basically, they won in an appeal against us. The decision was appealed up all the way to the Supreme Court of Nebraska, where we kind of won on a technicality. They didn't follow the Administrative Procedures Act. They didn't name the citizen protestants who triggered the process as parties to the appeal. And so since they never filed a valid appeal, they couldn't do anything about it. The beer stores were gone. And that really did lead to an ability to change things for the homeless and the street people. And just reshaped the battlefield, if that makes sense.
Yep.
To where now there's a way to help people out of that situation where White Clay just had claws. It was a place that it was so hard to get out. And now that these homeless are back in community with other people, now that the cadence of drinking isn't what it used to be, there's an ability to help people out of that situation.
When you told me how many beers was it a day they would sell?
11 to 13,000 cans
in a town of 15 people.
Yeah.
That's some serious drinking going on.
Well, I was one of those 15 people, and that was not us.
So it was 14.
No, it was definitely the liquor stores only existed to sell alcohol to people who could not really legally have a place to consume it. It was all meant to go back across the border into that dry reservation. So yeah, it was something where that town never should have existed as a place where alcohol was sold. But after 117 years of that town existing and kind of wreaking havoc on the community, it's still there. Now we have a Family Dollar and a Dollar General and all those things that every small town needs. But it's not like it used to be. It's a peaceful place, and like I said, now there's more of an ability to help people out of the situation that they were in.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they're readily accessible. I mean, when it comes to addiction, if somebody wants something, they're going to find a way to get it. That's just the truth. No matter if it's legal or not, they're going to find a way to get it. But having it that readily accessible, you know, like you said last night, they could panhandle till noon and people act out drunk the rest of the day. And that's just probably not the case now.
Yeah, well, it's been something that like alcohol policies researchers have researched a whole lot of, like, what does just increasing the price of alcohol a little bit do to the intensity that people are drinking with and the intensity of alcohol related crime. And what they've consistently found is even just small price increases make a significant difference on the rate at which people consume alcohol and the rate that it negatively impacts lives, right? A small price increase doesn't necessarily affect people who are already only drinking within their means and drinking, you know, a little bit, but it definitely affects the people who are drinking heavily. And so the alcohol still exists on the reservation. There's still bootlegging, and it's a problem. In fact, we are seeing some bootleggers who are mixing rubbing alcohol, who are mixing hand sanitizer in there, but overall people are consuming far less alcohol, especially among the homeless community. At least that's who I have a good measure for consistently, who I've been around. And so it doesn't solve the problems, but it slows things down. It is affecting the availability. A while back, I heard somebody remark, "Man, it's getting hard to find a skip these days." A skip is a water bottle filled with vodka, right? Where now the police are starting to get a handle on the bootleggers, and just with that reduction in availability, the temptation isn't the same as it would be if, you know, right down 2 miles down the road, you can walk to this town, easily panhandle as much alcohol as you can drink in a day if you're working hard at it, you know. So it really has changed things.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I don't think we understand about the drug and alcohol problems that we have in this country is that you're not going to legislate that out of existence. If people want to do something, our sinful nature, we're going to go do it. But, you know, slowing it down to where we can actually do some good. And I mean, it's probably saved I don't know how many lives.
Yeah, it's hard to know the total effect that it's had, but I'm sure it has. And yeah, ultimately what's going to really make the difference is creating community that really supports people in addiction, you know, creating resources that can help people out of that situation, creating safe places where people can go and be in an alcohol and drug-free environment. All those things need to be done. And I think all those things will be done. It's just one of those things, I think.
How long will it be? That's the question is.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a long answer to that. And I'm going to bring a parable in. When Jesus is feeding the 5,000, the disciples tell him, send these people away so that they can go get something to eat for themselves. And Jesus says, you give them something to eat. And the disciples right away, they start doing the math. Okay, that's going to take 8 months' wages to feed all these people. We can't do that. Jesus never asked them for the math. Jesus asked them, what do you have? They had 5 loaves and 2 fish. So then he took those 5 loaves, 2 fish, he blessed them, he multiplied it, and everyone was fed. And so I have a bad tendency of doing the math. And, when I do the math, I'm like, all right, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, I don't know what sort of time scale, some of these resources will roll in on. I have ideas for what my ministry, what Igloo Techa could do. But God has continually surprised me. When it came to the story of White Clay and what happened, that was 2 years after I moved to the reservation that those beer stores shut down. I was planning on doing that work in White Clay for decades. That was my original plan. I watched the people who were protesting and I thought, man, I'm glad that you guys are angry about it too, but nothing's going to change. And God took my little faith and he did something way, way bigger. When it came to the homeless shelter, again, I did the math. I was like, all right, this is going to take, so many years to even get a homeless shelter up and running. And we founded Igloo Techa in 2021. In May of 2021, we were running a homeless shelter on December 31st of 2021. Right? He provided the resources and he made everything happen. He keeps on doing those sorts of things. And so I'm hoping that as we just keep on putting one foot in front of another, that God's fighting the battles, that he's doing the real work, and I don't want to limit what he can do.
Yeah, so do you guys have a website, stuff like that, where people can donate? Mm-hmm. So I'll get that information. I'll put it in the video description so you guys can donate. Anybody that's watching this, they need a lot of help there. I know of one church that sends donations to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and I know for the people that are watching this video and have never been to a reservation, it is a different way of life. It is. I used to make the joke all the time when I lived in Montana that when you go on the res, you're entering a new country. Mm-hmm. It's not the same as it was when you just stepped across the border. Yep. It is a new country with a different way of living.
It truly is. In reality, sovereign nations within the U.S., but then also just culturally and the way of life is so different in some hard ways and in some really beautiful ways. I absolutely love where I live. I love the way the culture is. I've learned so much through it, but it is totally it's a different nation and totally different way of life.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about the Native American culture is that there are so many things that we don't study anymore, but so many great cultural aspects that they brought into our culture that we've just kind of pushed aside. I mean, one of the things I've always really loved about the Native American culture is the way they view family. The way they view family is something that we should be doing more of. It doesn't mean to them what it means to us.
Yeah, and the generosity too is one of those things that just I'm constantly I think of myself as a pretty generous person just in the way I live my life, and I always want to be generous, but at the same time I'm continually shamed by the generosity that I see around me, and just the way people give when it hurts and far beyond when it hurts. The way that people on the street in White Clay back in the day would feed me, right? It was one of those things where the generosity of the culture, the level of compassion that I see in the people around me is really awesome, and one of the things that sometimes makes it hard to leave. It's one of those things that I've gotten used to it, and now going back home, to where my family is at, they're the weird ones now.
Yeah, they're living life completely differently. But yeah, I'm imagining after 10 years, you're like, you guys are a little bit weird.
Yep.
They're all like, we got Curly Sue over here who lives on the reservation, and he's calling us weird.
Yeah, there's definitely things that you just get used to, and yeah, it has gotten to the point where Pine Ridge is home, and I don't really want to be anywhere else. I always keep it open to God can have me wherever He wants to, but I'm kind of in that spot where I'm like, God, you can put me wherever you want. Please make it Pine Ridge. Please keep me here.
Yeah, I say that all the time, that especially as a pastor, I don't get a choice in where I live. That's God's decision.
Mm-hmm.
But I say it to our congregation here all the time. I'm really hoping He keeps me here for a very, very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
That if I have a say in it, that's the prayer that I pray. But again, it's always His decision. When you're actually following Christ, it's His decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer your own.
Yep.
And yeah, it's amazing to see that you're actually living a life of mission and carrying out what Jesus has called us all to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my hope, like, what the mark that I want to leave on this earth, like the legacy that I want to leave, is inspiring and encouraging people to do the same thing. Yeah, not the exact same thing, but to follow God in whatever calling they might have with the same level of abandon. I think that, if you had come to me and pitched the idea of living my life the way I'm living it now, the way I have for the last 10 years, before I'd made this decision, before I felt that calling, I'd be like, no thanks.
No, I'm good.
But when I was at this crucial moment of deciding, to move out to the reservation, I had felt that calling, but I also felt conflicted. I was in that spot where I'm like, God, why is it so hard to hear your voice? Why won't you just speak to me? Why won't you just tell me where you want me to be? And in that moment, in that crisis where I was trying to figure out where I belonged and I felt pulled in multiple directions, I realized that it wasn't just God's voice speaking, but I had a lot of other voices that were pretty loud in my head. I had that voice that says, Abram, you got to wait until you get your degree, until you get your education before you go out there. And I had that other voice that said, hey, you got some really good friends and you deserve to stick around for a while. And I had lots of voices telling me what was safe, what was sensible, what was best for me. And when I realized that and just finally took it to God in prayer, I just said, God, whatever you want for my life is what I want. The best place I can be is in the center of your will. And as soon as I prayed that prayer, it was like, I'm going to Pine Ridge. And I still hold that belief. It's still something that pops into my head over and over again, that the best place to be is going to be in the center of God's will. And that might not look that way from all external views of things. I just told you some stuff about, being homeless and living in my car and living some rough circumstances. And I haven't told you all of it. It gets worse. But also being able to walk with God, getting to experience God in new ways, being able to be a part of something bigger, just living with His joy, with His peace. It's not worth trading for anything. And the message that I'm always trying to put out there is like, I don't want to. Well, I'm on a podcast. I can preach, but that this whole life is a vapor. It's here today, gone tomorrow. Every thing that we might find joy and pleasure in, that we might find purpose in, if it's not God, it's fleeting, right? And so there's nothing that you're going to trade away in following God, that when you reach eternity, you're going to be like, you're going to feel like you missed it, right?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a funny story. I once preached a funeral,
Mm-hmm.
and a family member read this poem. It was called The Dash, about the dash in between the two lines on your headstone. And after she read that poem, I completely changed my message, and just very much the Holy Spirit gave me something to preach that day. And I said, that dash, we think that's a long amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most people live, 70 to 100 years, somewhere in there. And we think that that's an exorbitant amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
What is that compared to eternity? Because that's the gift our Lord Jesus gave us.
Mm-hmm.
It's a drop in the bucket. So why wouldn't you want to do everything you could in that short time that you have here to serve him?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really not, compared to eternity, what's even 100 years?
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing. It's nothing. But we're given that grace to have an eternity with him.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the greatest purchases I ever made was a telescope. Got this, pretty decent telescope for like $200 on Facebook Marketplace.
It wasn't the Mazda?
Actually, the Mazda, I was paid to trade the Mazda for another car, and I needed the money more than I needed my car. So, but this, it's been one of those things where one of my favorite things to do has just been to like zoom out, right? To look at another galaxy that's 24 million light years away, with 1 trillion stars in it, right? 2.4 million. I don't want to get my numbers wrong. But to be able, we can't comprehend either number.
No.
But to look out and like, I'm a speck on a speck. The any search for significance that involves what I can do to this speck, or what this speck can do, is just kind of vain, and it's hard. I don't want to say silly. I don't want to like cheapen it or anything like that, but maybe a little silly, of we get so obsessed with our conditions living on this earth and what the other specks on this speck think of us, that again, in the grand scheme of things and our search for significance, there's only one thing that is significant, and that's where we're at with our Creator, and that's knowing and loving and growing with our Creator. And so it's just really been something where my perspective just continues to grow on that, and my view of this life just keeps on shrinking, so I guess my encouragement is to just follow God with abandon. There's nothing to lose, and there's everything to gain.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. I want to put a description in the video for you guys. I encourage you, reach out, donate to Abram's ministry. There's a lot of people out there that need our help. It'd be a great way for us to give some of our love, some of our gifts that we've been given in abundance, to help somebody who has a little bit less than we do. So I thank you for your time today. I just pray that God blesses your ministry out there, and that more people come to know Jesus out on the reservation. Mm-hmm. And most of all, we pray for your safety out there. So, yeah, thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll be talking to you again soon.